Welcome to episode 4 of the Western Outdoor News podcast, the audio companion to the Western Outdoor News weekly publication. Today on the show, we talk with Western Outdoor News editor Mike Stevens about upcoming trout regulations and how they might affect Sierra anglers. And then we sit with Okuma Fishing Tackle President Doug Lasko. He shares his unexpected journey that led him to become the president of Okuma in the United States. And he shares the funny story behind the name of one of Okuma's most popular reels.
I'm not kidding either. One of our better selling reels is actually named after a sandwich we saw on a menu from Brazil.
But first, I have to mention this week's cover shot on the February 12th issue of Western Outdoor News with the headline, Trophy Pyramid Striper Caught from Shore. It's a massive 37-pound striper that nearly takes up the entire cover. It's such a cool shot, you've got to see it. As the headline says, it was caught from shore at Pyramid Lake on a big 14-inch Finn Baits custom Great Grandpa lure. It's an awesome handmade bait from Tanner Finn if you've ever heard of it. Speaking of catching striper, just a heads up, Western Outdoor News will be holding the 38th annual Lake Havasu Striper Derby, May 15th through 16th, 2021. Bring the whole family. Entry ranges from $90 for a single-person basic entry all the way up to $375 for our high roller entry, with plenty of options in between. Tons of cash and prizes will be given away at the show, along with a Klamath boat with a Suzuki outboard. Again, that's a Striper Derby, May 15th through the 16th, 2021. Sign up today at wonews.com. So now back to the show. I sat with Western Outdoor News editor Mike Stevens to discuss new trout regulations coming March 1st, 2021.
After a very warm winter, the snow finally arrived in the Eastern Sierra. I'm hearing 10 feet of snow in some places, especially up on the mountain around the ski resort. And that does have an effect on the fishing, not so much the fish themselves, but the access to them. People are still fishing the upper Owens, but for example, the guides at Sierra Drifters are taking clients out there on snowmobiles because if you drive a truck out there, what happens is people park their truck, then the sun comes up in the afternoon, the snow melts, and now their truck's sitting in mud and they get stuck. So a lot more of the fishing is going on down in the Owens Valley, which isn't as affected by winter storms. So you have anglers fishing Pleasant Valley Reservoir, the Owens River, and from what we've heard from our sources, they're doing pretty good down there.
There's something that I saw in the paper that kind of caught my eye, and it should have caught everybody's eye. There's some new inland trout fishing regulations that might be going into effect here in March 1st. What do these mean, and why should we be paying attention to these?
According to Department of Fish and Wildlife, they will go into effect March 1st. And what this is, in review, a year and a half, 2 years ago, the department started trying to simplify the regulations across the entire state. Originally, they were talking about, and this is very general, there's exceptions, but basically having the five fish limit, water open year-round, no gear restrictions statewide. There was an uproar about that from stakeholders ranging from anglers to local businesses, lodging, guides, resorts, and a lot of people were against it in general. And then what the department did after that is they held meetings where people could show up and voice their concerns. And they had, I think it was about a half dozen meetings over the course of the 2019 and the beginning of 2020. I will say the department did take the input from those meetings into consideration, and they recently came out with a different version of the same idea, and it's going to have a bit of an impact on the Eastern Sierra fishing, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. And I mean, it's got its pluses and minuses, which we can go over, but it's definitely interesting. And we didn't see it coming as far as this March 1st thing. It was a couple weeks ago. They said,
this is
less than a month, this is happening.
Yeah. Okay, so what will change starting March 1st? I know it's kind of nebulous. There's an 80-page document that
Right.
they want us to look at, but what are some of the changes that people might notice?
Well, the 80-page thing, that covers the whole state. So if you're an Eastern Sierra angler, you can access these regs on the Department of Fish and Wildlife site, and then it's alphabetical, and you can just look at the waters you're interested in. But they produced a flyer that said the significant changes for Inyo and Mono County are all lakes and reservoirs will be open to year-round trout fishing with a 5-fish limit starting March 1st. But then there's exceptions. And that's the key factor there are these exceptions because there's 19 resort lakes is what they call them in this that will not open on March 1st. Well, those are a lot of the big popular drive up, during the general trout season spots like Crowley Lake, the entire Mammoth Lakes Basin, the June Lake Loop, the big lakes in Bridgeport. Almost every lake you can drive to is not affected by these new regs.
Okay, so that's good news for people that might be concerned, wondering do these regulations affect me and where I'm going? If you're going to one of these popular places, you're likely not going to be affected by the new regulations. Yeah,
like one of the main concerns with their original idea was, would there be an opener anymore? Because if everything's open year-round, well, there's no more opener. And when I say the opener, it's the last Saturday of April. It's a big deal, both for local businesses and trout anglers. In my opinion, there's still very much going to be an opener because all those 19 lakes will open on that day. What will open on March 1st, just to touch on a few, going through the list, you've got North Lake in Bishop Creek Canyon, Intake 2 also in Bishop Creek Canyon. Those will be open year-round. Lake Trumbull up by Virginia Lakes, pretty much the entire backcountry, and a lot of creeks. So you've got backcountry lakes that may not even be accessible, most of the year into late spring. But then you also have certain tributaries that or creeks that are known for being very important for the brown trout spawn. They're not affected either. So they didn't open up Rush Creek. They didn't open up the any of the tributaries to Crowley Lake. But you can fish places like Convict Creek through the campground is going to be available now. And a lot of those like campground type creeks will be available to fish, but it's all catch and release and all artificial lures with barbless hooks, and you can't keep anything.
Is that the biggest kind of impact? Why did they do this?
They did it to simplify the regulations, I think, on their end. It would be pretty easy for, if every body of water in the state was a 5-fish limit without gear restrictions, it would be easier to enforce the rules instead of like different regs for different bodies of water. Mm-hmm. But a lot of those regs are, they're specific for protecting spawning brown trout and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of the anglers and even guides who would have an added opportunity to take more clients out over the course of the winter. I've only heard of one guide that was for opening it all up.
Okay.
All the guides were against it other than the one I heard. I'm sure there's more out there, but I've only heard of one, and I have a lot of contacts up there. And
so they want to kind of keep certain areas closed off to protect right. the populations up there.
Right. A lot of the better fish up there aren't stocked. They're naturally occurring natural spawners up there, and they need a break basically.
Yeah, a lot of pressure. All right, so are we for it, against it, or is it just added confusion? What do you personally what do you think?
Yeah, I'm an Eastern Sierra guy, and I have a personal interest in all this. And originally, the original proposals, the ones I just flopped on your desk here, I was against most of it. I did have a couple angler friends who thought it would be cool to go up and fish Bridgeport Reservoir for big browns in the winter if it was accessible and stuff like that. But this is such a it's not all encompassing. It protects a lot of the right waters. There's a lot of head scratchers in there too. Mm-hmm. Like there are backcountry lakes that are 11,000 feet up that aren't accessible until June that are now open all winter.
Oh, wow.
So, and that's another thing that comes into play here is the safety factor. You're going to have Southern Californians heading up there, walking out on frozen lakes, and so that comes into play. Are they going to have added search and rescue, resources available up there? That's a big part of it now too.
Yeah, for the people that aren't used to going up there and hiking on different terrain, like you said, those Southern California anglers that maybe are trying to look for that weekend adventure and end up getting stuck in a lake that they didn't expect.
Yeah, frozen lakes can be dangerous, especially for someone who's never been on one.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, any closing thoughts on the regulations here?
No, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Like I said, I don't think it's going to affect the opener. That still, for all intents and purposes, will be the opener. I don't think the new open waters is going to cause a big rush of people to go up there because it's hard to fish in winter. It's hard to catch trout in winter, and especially when you can't use. You can't use bait, you can't use barb lures. I mean, it's going to be the same guys that are going up there now to fish the Upper Owens and Hot Creek, and then they're relegated to only fly fishing. So, I mean, if people want to go up there and try to get trout, they're going to be using barbless artificial lures with no scent, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be like fishing up there in June, that's for sure.
If you are a trout fisherman, come on down to Western Outdoor News' first ever Troutcast at Lake Cuyamaca in San Diego and see if you can catch the biggest fish of the day. Enjoy the outdoors with friends and family and a shot at winning some top shelf prizes. Mark your calendars for April 24th and 25th and register online at wonews.com. Next up on the show, I sat down with Okuma Fishing Tackle President Doug Lasko. Doug, born and raised in Ohio, has a fascinating story of how he came to run the iconic Okuma brand in North America. In his 20s, while working in Washington, D.C., Doug learned how to speak Chinese and decided to leave everything behind and travel the world. Traveling to places like Beijing, Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, and Europe, all before the internet was a thing. After 5 months of traveling the globe, Doug wondered what was next, and he eventually returned to Taiwan, where he got a job teaching English at the local YMCA. The YMCA eventually put out an ad seeking businesses that were interested in teaching their staff English.
And so one of the places that actually answered the ad was Okuma. And Okuma is a Taiwanese-owned producer of fishing tackle. This would now be 1992. Mm-hmm. And so I went there, and it is actually just kind of luck. I ended up teaching there because
so they had you teaching at the actual factory or at the company, so they weren't coming to you.
So it was a factory.
Okay, so you were actually boots on the ground, standing in the factory, teaching English to the factory workers and all the staff at Okuma back in 1992.
Yes, and it actually was a little bit more, fortuitous, I guess, what I'd say, is that I went there with the YMCA, and they wanted to introduce me. Okay, so here I am. This is your teacher. So then they're talking about the costs and everything associated with it. And they say, okay, you can leave, show up on Monday. So I show up on Monday, I walk in the door, and they say, well, what are you doing here? And I'm like, well, I'm here to teach English. And they said, well, we couldn't come to an agreement. So, we didn't go forward with the class. And I said, okay, well, what did you want to pay? And so they told me it was, here's how much. And I'm like, well, I'll teach for that much. And they said, okay, well, go upstairs and get the class together and we'll start the class. Had I just kind of walked away from it and said, okay, well, that didn't work out. But instead I said, okay, let's do it. And And so I did that for about a year and made some good friends and,
Yeah.
Really got to know them as far as the company.
At this point, did you have any knowledge of the fishing industry? Did you go fishing in your spare time, or were you just kind of dropped into this company with no previous knowledge of fishing?
Yeah, no, good question. I'm from origin, like I said, from Ohio, and I come from a family I have three brothers, and we fished quite a lot as a kid, and it was primarily Great Lakes, river type fishing. Nothing as far as manufacturing, nothing as far as large scale, fishing as a hobby. But yeah, of course, I knew quite a bit about the fishing, about fishing in general. You talk about brands and things of that nature. You'd know the big brands, but that was about it.
Yeah, so you are an American guy just in a factory in Taiwan, right? And we're teaching all the staff English. So what happens next? I mean, where does it go from there?
I worked for about a year. I left Taiwan for a few months and traveled again, backpacked again around Asia, came back to Taiwan, and I got a phone call from a former staff member at Okuma and a friend, and they said, well, we're looking for a salesperson. You want a job? And I said, well, I've actually just started a new job, but I have a friend who's interested, and that friend I introduced a person by the name of Sam Brenner, and he's actually currently our VP of sales. So he took the job in Taiwan, and he was a friend of a friend that I worked with, or actually a brother of a friend that I worked with. And so he did take the job, and he started working as a salesperson in Taiwan for Okuma, and he did that for about a year, and we remained friends. And then Okuma said, look, we want to open up an office in the United States. We were primarily what I would call a European-facing factory. I think it's somewhat interesting is that, a lot of factories, because of international markets, are so large. A lot of times, at least in my opinion, I would call them, European facing, or maybe Japanese facing, or maybe US facing, because the capacity and the products in general are very different from continent to continent, or large markets to large markets. Mm-hmm. And Okuma was a very much European facing company, to where most of our customers were European. And we did distribute in other parts of the world, like South America and Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. But the majority of our production went towards Europe. And we had very little, if any, business in Japan and in the United States. And so one of the key markets, obviously, the largest market in the world for fishing tackle, is the United States. And so,
so up until this point, they were not in the United States at all. So what you're saying is they approached you to lead the charge, right?
Well, they approached my counterpart, Sam, to come back and set up the company in the United States, which he did. When he was transitioning, we were friends, and he says, "Hey, well, I'm actually leaving Okuma." And I said, well, I'm leaving my position in my other job. And so he moved to the United States. I took his job in Taiwan. And And so I worked in Taiwan at the factory for 5 years. For the next 5 years. And he came back to the United States. And within about 2 years, we set up a distribution center in Southern California. And he actually lives in Seattle, works out of a home office, and handles all the sales. But we have a distribution center. At the time, we had a small distribution center in Brea.
Okay. And what year was this?
This would have been the distribution center, I think, was opened up in 97. And so he worked at Okuma in 94. I worked at Okuma from 95 on. And then within a couple of years, we opened up a full warehouse and started ramping up. In fact, our director of product development, John Bretza, and I don't know how many people will be familiar with his name, but we have some products that he's been extremely instrumental in the development, which is especially in Southern California. And so he's also a very long time employee at Okuma.
So speaking of kind of having to change the product, when Okuma came to the United States and you guys had this distribution center, were there any sort of tweaks or anything that you had to do to the product to accommodate the American consumer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in general, we worked more and more towards especially saltwater products. You have to always improve your quality control. You always have to improve your engineering. And we brought out some products many years ago, more than 20 years ago, that they reached a certain level of quality, they reached a certain level of consumer, but we also realized that there's a lot more demanding consumers that we wanted to be able to try to reach, and we wanted to be able to try to challenge ourselves to get to that level of product. And we wanted to be able to get into that segment of the market, and we wanted to, like I said, challenge ourselves. And so we introduced a little bit more than 10 years ago a line of products called the Makaira. And at least in Southern California and some of the other parts of the country, and even in the world, where there's large, big game fishing, it's reached a level of quality that I would feel would be considered one of the mainstays in that segment. And so, it was a challenge for our factory. And that challenge is how do we keep continuously improving the products and be able to, really come out with a product that we are able to really reach all levels of fishermen from entry level to professional level. And I think that we've actually, we've really accomplished it with that. There's some patented technology in it. But then other products, again, we work with a lot of shops, a lot of our retail customers, salespeople, and we talk to a lot of people, and we try to get input from the people who are either selling it or using it to really try to design products. Over the years, we've really invested heavily on being able to continually improve the overall quality. But it's tough, and it's a tough market to be in. It's pretty exciting, and you're always seeing people coming out with new stuff.
You mentioned the Makaira. I personally have a Komodo. There's something that I've always wondered about manufacturers is how do you guys come up with some of these awesome names? I mean, some of these names are so cool. I wonder, who came up with Makaira and who came up with Komodo?
Well, I have a little, I guess, confession to make. The original name of the Makaira was actually brought up by somebody in the industry who used to work with us. He's a good friend of ours, but I won't name names, but he'll know who I'm talking about. But it was the Tahitian.
Tahitian. See, even that sounds cool.
Well, some people disagreed at the time, and the Makaira is the genus name, I believe, for billfish, and so we ended up switching over to Makaira, and it's kind of taken a life of its own, and people I think know the name Makaira. When you mention Makaira, they if they're into that type of sport fishing. But it's a struggle to come up with names, and it's always fun, and it's especially fun when you have new people that come into the company that try to give you their name suggestions, and it's like, nope, that's been used. Nope, that's been used. And
I'm sure there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
Is there any talk of that doesn't sound badass enough? We need to make this sound cooler, or I'd love to hear some of those conversations. It's such a weird niche interest, but it's it's something that I always wonder about.
You go through phases, and so unfortunately or fortunately, some of our names are variations, because a lot of times you don't want to use the exact same word because of trademarking issues or that type of thing, but you'll make variations. And so one of my favorite places to go in the world is South America, and I travel there with Sam Brenner virtually every year for the last 25 years. And we're drinking a bottle of wine, and we look at the name, and it's like, oh, hey,
and that's your VP of sales from earlier in the story. You guys are still hanging out, still going to South America.
Oh yeah,
still going fishing.
Yeah, like I said, Sam, John, and actually quite a few other of our employees are long-term employees, working with them for well over 20 years, and close friends, family, everything. And we travel a lot together, and we've grown up together. And so, we'll be drinking a bottle of wine, or even eating a sandwich. You're looking at a foreign language menu, and it's hey, well, that could be kind of interesting. And I'm not kidding either. One of our better selling reels is actually named after a sandwich we saw on a menu from Brazil.
No way. Can I ask which reel that is?
Yeah, it's called the Magda. And the Magda is a line counter reel that primarily sells in the Great Lakes area for line counters, and it was a menu item. It was a sandwich, and it was a really good sandwich, and we had a few of them. And so we thought, well, let's just call it the Magda.
Wow. Do you ever go back to that same spot and have that same sandwich, or is that not somewhere you guys go very often?
I haven't been back to Brazil in a few years, but no, that was early on in the days of our travels. And I think sometimes we treated it as an extension of our backpacking days, because Sam has a very similar background as myself. And we always try to go find somewhere new or something interesting to go do when we travel. And that just happened to be one of those side trips.
So speaking of your travels and obviously fishing, what are some of the cool places around the world where you've caught fish? And I'm sure some of them are pretty exotic.
I've been really fortunate. And again, I think a lot of it stems from the fact that we are in the fishing tackle industry, and, love of outdoors is top of mind. And so, that's, I think, a real driving force for, many of us in this industry. And when people ask, or they'll say, oh, you're in the fishing tackle industry, you must fish all the time. Everybody's answer, it's a stock answer, is, well, before I got in the industry, I used to fish all the time, and now I'm busy in the fishing tackle industry. But, I do fish almost every year in South America. I fish for golden dorado in Argentina. And in fact, I learned a little fly fishing the last few years. And last year I was able to catch what I would consider kind of a fish of a lifetime on a fly in Argentina. We fished Chile.
When you go to a place like that, and you are obviously going to international waters, like, what do you hire a local guide, or do you just wing it? Who hooks you up with these fish?
It's a little bit of both. So if we're with some of our distributor friends, and they've, because again, Okuma is an international brand where we ship anywhere there's fishing, we ship. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of agents and friends who have been with us for 20 plus years. And so if they fish, they may have a boat, they have favorite spots. We want to go out for an afternoon, we'll go with them. And so they know what to do. But yeah, a lot of times, and in the United States, like one of our all-time favorite places to go is Louisiana, and fish, for redfish down in Louisiana. And we typically will hire a guide, or we'll have a product tester. But of course, we like to support local guides, and then we'll get a group together. We'll go fishing. And of course, we call it product testing for a reason, because that gets us, kind of a hall pass when we have to go do product testing. But yeah, typically you will have a guide. And a lot of it is we like to just try to go as local as possible, just to kind of get a little bit more of a local experience.
Yeah, fishing redfish is on my bucket list. I've never actually caught one. I also think that peacock bass is like one on my bucket list as well. Do you have a species that that you've always been wanting to catch, but you just haven't yet?
Well, peacock bass I've never caught, and it's definitely on my bucket list. Whether it'll end up being in the Amazon or there's quite a few in Florida.
If anybody listening doesn't know what a peacock bass is, you should definitely look up some photos because it's one of the most outrageous looking fish that I've ever seen. So it's always been on my list since I've been a kid.
Yeah, and I mean, basically they say bass on steroids. So super aggressive. It can be very large. The Florida strain I don't think is nearly as large as the Amazonian strain, but from people that have told me that they've been fishing in Florida, it's a great experience. And there's actually a lot of targeting them now, but I think tarpon's still on my list. I have not really caught a tarpon in the past.
So you've been with it for quite some time now, and you've seen some trends come and go. What are some of the trends that you see that might be making a big comeback in the near future, or just what do you see with the trends moving forward with the whole fishing industry?
I've been more and more involved within, kind of the I guess I would call it the government side of the business. And I think that for our industry and for a lot of people, they don't realize, what that means. With COVID happening in the last year, I think a lot of people in the outdoor industries have seen an increase in participation. A lot more people, obviously, trying to get outside, which is a good thing for our sport. And so for us in the industry, our goal and what we want to see as a trend is increased participation. The parent company or kind of the industry arm of the fishing tackle industry. It's an association called the American Sport Fishing Association. I think they've done a really good job at really analyzing, who participates, how they participate, and that we're actually in an older industry. There's a lot of people who are in their 60s and older that really make up a large portion of the customer base, and what we're trying to do is attract younger people, attract more women to fishing, try to get more kids out fishing, and that I think is our number one goal as far as a trend. And the other thing I think that I think a lot of people are involved with on that side of it is advocacy for being able to get access and keep access to fishing. And in California, that's becoming more and more of a challenge. And I know a lot of people that would listen to this podcast would remember some of what's called the marine protected areas. And so it's not that we're anti-conservation. I think that it's probably pretty fair to say that a lot of people who fish or enjoy the outdoors are actually in their own right conservationists. And I think that for the most part, in Okuma is probably we participate. We're very active in this arm in the CCA in California, and different. We donate and spend a lot of our time in different parts of the country working on advocacy and working on access.
Yeah, it seems almost like being. I was telling Bill Shedd this on the last episode that it seems like being an angler, especially in California. There's just a constant battle to say where can I fish? What are the limits? There's always new legislation about this. So there's that AB 3030 that we talked about in the last episode. But if you just wanted to touch on that AB 3030 bill and kind of what that means to anglers and why they should care.
Yeah, of course. And it's a national bill. It's not even just so much in California. I mean, California, and I'm sure Bill Shedd, I've had the pleasure of knowing Bill for quite a while now, and he's a person who's been involved in this for many, many, many years. In California, it has actually been a little bit delayed, but it's going to come back. But on a national level, the new administration that just came in has made it part of their platform. And I don't think, at least in my personal opinion, I don't think that most recreational anglers or even companies in the industry should be, we're not worried about having some kind of ground rules for where we can fish and what we can do, but we want access. And recreational angling is just that. It's recreational. I think it's our right to be able to have water usage and access to that, and access for many different types of people. The large part of this is really educating the political people as to what the recreational angler really is, and what does the recreational angling community bring to the economy or bring to the local people. So, you have to factor in, like you mentioned, guides. That's a big part of the economy, and those are a lot of jobs, and supporting local restaurants and supporting hotels and things of that nature. And so, just being able to say that we're different from commercial fishing in that way. We're different from the fact that this is more of a recreation versus going out and netting or whatever. It's not necessarily an us against them, but we are a different segment. We have different effect on the local community. Everybody has their opinions, but really it's I think a lot of times people who don't fish, they tend to lump everybody together, and that's not. I don't think it shouldn't be really looked at that way.
Well, it's almost similar in the hunting world to compare it to a hunter versus a factory farmer. It's like it's at the end of the day, it's still meat on the table, but the way that you got them, it's a totally different industry, even though it is still putting meat on the table. So I think I see you on that point of view. It's the same industry, but it's also a completely different side of the same industry.
Right, and I think that a lot of it goes to heritage. A lot of it goes to also, again, conservation. And what a lot of politicians and people don't know, that we in the industry understand very clearly, is for the last 45 years, the fishing tackle industry, every time we sell something, there's a 10% tax. It's an excise tax. And that money goes directly towards restorations, clean water, a lot of projects, Fish and Game, a lot of their budget comes from that money. And if you can imagine 10% on every sale, and that doesn't mean at the cash register, that means that we sell to our customers. But you're talking tens and tens of millions of dollars that goes into a federal government pool that is really funding a lot of the conservation projects. And it could be fixing docks, it could be cleaning up rivers or streams, or a lot of these projects are funded by our industry. And so if you restrict that, then you restrict the sale. And then if you restrict the sale and the participation, then you don't have the money to have those projects. And so it's a little bit of a circle. And so we see ourselves very much in that conservation vein. And I think that the ASA that I mentioned earlier, the American Sport Fishing Association, I think organizations like CCA, I think that they play a very vital role in educating, especially politicians, but also fisher people, that this is what we are trying to do as a group. And we sit side by side. I mean, we talk with people that are our competitors in the market, but when it comes to this conservation, comes to these groups, we sit side by side, and we're pretty united on our messaging to be able to try to really advocate for people's, rights and people's ability to go out and enjoy the outdoors.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks again to Doug Lasko for coming out and sharing all that history with us. And thank you guys for listening all the way at the end here. Check out wonews.com for all of our latest subscription offers. Again, Trout Fest and the Striper Derby are coming up, so make sure you mark your calendars. Thanks for listening.